Morning chaps and lasses. That's where we are at the moment. I don't know if you can see that. It's not brilliant. And you might get a flicker from that horrible LED light above us, but it does give me the brightness I need. This is where we are at the moment. I'm going to go into this a bit backward actually. I'm going to remove, or partly remove, the block, the cylinder block, because I didn't film putting the block on, and I didn't film the little sneaky tricks I use in order to line up the pistons with the bore. Now, if we look closely there, you can see that this piston, which is going to be, that's number 1, that's number 2, number 3. 2 and 3, when they're top dead center, these are bottom dead center, 1 and 4. The way this system works is on what they call a wasted spark ignition system. So even if that one is on fire stroke, you still get a spark, because the same set of points sends a spark to the plug on that one, because these two, 1 and 4, will fire at the same time. That makes no sense whatsoever if you think about it. Even though they do fire at the same time, in other words, there's a spark, this one will be on its exhaust stroke if that one's on its compression bang stroke. So it depends on which stroke one is on in relation to the valve timing. Gets a little bit complicated, but that's the basics. I'm going to see if I can move that cylinder head, cylinder block up a bit, to try and show you the rings and the way I actually push them in. It's a tricky little job, and I hope we don't end up having to go backwards in order to insert the pistons again into the bore, because it can take some time, and a lot of it is just about patience. Let me just put this down a sec. Just gonna line you guys up with that. There, you should be able to see there. So we're just going to try we can move this cylinder up a little bit. Let's put you over there so you can probably see better. And one of the dowels has got a little bit stuck in the block, so I'm going to see if I can pull that down. There he is. It's always best to have them in the crankcase. Not ripping the gasket or anything, make sure it's still down. I think that's probably as far as I'm gonna come up, because 1 and 4, we are just at a point there where we're beginning to show the gudgeon pin. Maybe a tweak more. Let's see how we go. I'm going to see if I can control this a bit more with some wood. That's up to the gudgeon pin. Two and three, they're quite high up on the stroke, so we're not going to see the piston rings for those, and I don't really want to see the piston rings for the other one, for the other cylinders as well, because that means they've come out. I think that's about as far as I can go without letting the rings pop out. Now I don't know if you guys can see this. Let's just have a look. We may have just see the ring. It just showed the very lucky there actually. Because if that had gone a little bit further, that ring would have popped out. Now, if you look carefully, you can see there's a generous lead, a chamfer on the liner. And there's also a chamfer on the inside of the liner, which you can't see very well. Now, what I tend to do, it's nice to have all the tools of the job. But getting hold of the special Kawasaki tool to hold this piston, that piston, that piston, all four pistons, on a piston ring clamp, getting hold of that tool is not impossible, but they're few and far between. So what I tend to do is I normally put 2 and 3 at the top dead center, and I lower the block on first, and I use this, 2 of these. Just bear with me a tick and I'll go and get them. I made 3 of those. You probably only need 2. You're only going to do the 2 middle pistons, 2 and 3 first. And what I tend to do, I don't know if these will fit now because of the position, but I tend to put them in there, and this would be at top dead center. Both 2 and 3 would be at top dead center. So it basically sits there and the piston sits flat on top of that wood. And what that allows me to do is to keep the piston in a square position to go into the bore. Now that can make all the difference between going back, behind the block, in front of the block, to the side blocks, to tease the piston rings in using your screwdriver. Now a lot of people would say, oh, well, it's a bit dodgy using a screwdriver, but if you're careful and you just press like that on the side, the weight of the block will allow those rings to stay where they are, because as you push the rings in the groove of the piston, the chamfer on the inside of the liner tends to fall down a little bit. In other words, the gravity is pulling the block down. It can be tricky, but if you do it patiently and you get these 2 in first, then you can put a socket on the top there, put a little cap nut on top of it, or a nut on top of that one, so that you're basically a nut on top of that one. Don't think it was on the job then, but a nut would go on top of that, and what that would do is hold it in place so the barrel doesn't come up if you have to lift it up to adjust it. So just to recap, you put your wood to hold the piston square. when these two, doesn't matter which one you do first, when these two are top dead center. The piston sits on the wood square. In other words, it can't rock about like that. And what that does, it allows you to have an easier task. As I said, it can still be tricky, but it allows you to have that piston in a position where it is square to the bore, so it's not flopping around like that on the comrod. And that can make all the difference with getting that piston in without breaking a ring. And that's basically it, guys. Now obviously when these two are in, and you've got your cap on here, you can turn the crank a little bit with a wrench, and then you bring these down, or bring these down, those up, and then you do the same with these. You may find you might not get the wood in. There is a bit of jiggery pokery here to get what you need in place, i.e. these woods, in order to keep the piston level. Once these two are in though, it is quite easy. I'd say it was easier then when you've got these two in to rock the block a little bit very carefully, keeping pressure with your screwdriver on the side of the piston, pushing the rings in. And gravity helps. It helps a hell of a lot, because if you get the rings in, the block may drop a little bit, so that the rings are then seated inside the bore, and the piston is in the bore obviously with the rings on. But the key thing is here, and I cannot overemphasize, the key thing is here is patience. If you take your time, don't force anything, don't be tempted to tap anything until, and even then it's only gentle taps, until you see those rings disappear from this area here. You can see if I can get that in focus better. When you see the rings have disappeared here and they're actually inside the bore, then you can start tapping down. I'm going to tap the block down in a minute, and you'll see what I mean. If we come around the other side, another way of doing it, and I've done it on different engines. If you look carefully here, the piston is just below the line, the bottom of the liner, and it's revealing the gudgeon pin and the circlip. Now, oops, what I tend to do, and I have done in the past, is as I said earlier in the video, I only take the circlip on the inside of each piston, so that I can always push the gudgeon pin in from the outside. And if I work on piston 2 and 3 first, piston number 1 and number 4 is not in my way, and you can see that earlier in the video. Once I've done each piston and put the circlip in, obviously the gudgeon pin is not going to come out. But let's take a scenario. Sometimes if you get a problem doing this, you could try, and it's worked for me a couple of times, you put the rings on the piston, you put all the pistons in the bore, and you hold the block in place with a piece of wood somewhere in there. You tap the piston down to a point roughly where it is there, here. And you start obviously from the inside and work out. So you do the two insides, 2 and 3, okay, and then you work out, and then you put the gudgeon pin in through the comrod whilst the piston is in the bore. So you're tapping the piston down the bore to reveal something close to this. It doesn't always work, because it depends on the design of the engine, but some engines I've managed to do it like that, especially when you're in a situation where this doesn't work so easily, the method I've showed you in the last 5-10 minutes. So that's another option. It can be a bit tricky either way, but it all comes down to patience, planning, not letting yourself get carried away with pushing and shoving and tapping too hard. Just take your time. If it's all nice and clean, and the studs and the holes are nice and clean, and it is on here because it's all been aqua blasted, then it does help, because you don't get any dirt into the bore, you don't get any dirt into the pistons, but more importantly, the block is easier and freer to move. That way, it helps get these pistons into their appropriate cylinder liner without breaking the rings. It's quite complicated, and I probably gone overboard with my explanations. I mean, obviously, if you've got any comments, stick them below, and you know, I'll try and do my best to answer them. But I hope that gives you some idea of the way I do it. It's not for everybody. Everybody's got their own ways, and I'm not saying this is the only way. You know, you choose whether it's helpful for you. But at the end of the day, it's all about, as I said, I cannot overemphasize, patience. Line it up, patience. And I'm going to finish there, and I'm now going to tap that block back home, making sure that we get the cam chain guide and the cam chain out the way so that we don't get any snags on that. Okay, bear with me, folks. If you do tap it down, 3 taps on each side in the middle between each cylinder liner is usually good to keep it fairly level. Now we've gone past the point of keeping that guide out the way, we can put it to one side or the back and let it rest there. Now the dowels now are coming into play, and they're lining up the block. So the block's got to go down in that position. And you can tell by the sound when you get it home. There you go. So that's home there. If we look along the line, along the back here, you can see the gasket there. Obviously it's not down super tight because we haven't tightened it, but it's down firm. And there we have it, folks. You can see that very well. Now if we look inside the block, you will see number 3 and number 2 piston is slightly higher. Right, okay, that's that bit. I needed to get that on video. I should have done it the first time I put the block on. Planning what you're going to do, take your time and be patient, and let gravity help you with the weight of that block coming down. Okay, I'll be back later.